How's it going, guys? My name is Zach with The Movie Castle, and today we're going to be talking about Night of the Living Dead, the original remake from 1990. This is directed by special effects legend Tom Savini and stars Tony Todd and Patricia Tallman. In addition to that, this was also produced by George Romero and John Russo, who were with the original movie, and the script for the remake is written by George Romero. So, even though this is a remake, this is a lot of the original crew together. George Romero, obviously, the entire series creator. Tom Savini, though, did work as an actor in Part 2, and as a special effects artist in 2 and 3. So, yeah, he's one of the guys as well, and he's directing it. Like, it really is the same crew, and it's not just a remake that they passed off to some other crew to do something with. And you can tell, if you look at the rest of the Romero zombie franchises, like the other remakes, Night of the Living Dead 3D, or Night of the Living Dead Resurrection, you can tell that a lot of those have a distance from the original creative team. This one doesn't, and it's the same people around. Now, as those of you who stuck with this channel know, I've been going through and reviewing the original Romero series of Night of the Living Dead. I've done a lot of the other spin-offs, but I just recently did Night of the Living Dead through Day of the Dead, and I had intended to come back with Land of the Dead, but after thinking it over for quite a bit, I really should be doing this one. And even though this is a remake, why I'm doing this is basically Part 4. The logic behind this is all the Romero movies, there's one per decade. Night of the Living Dead in the 60s, Dawn in the 70s, and Day in the 80s. And each one of those movies kind of encapsulates what their decade is about, and just captures filmmaking from that era. Now, Land of the Dead didn't come around to the 2000s, so what's the Dead title for the 90s? Well, that's this one. So this is basically the fourth movie, even though it's really a remake and Land's really the fourth. I felt I should cover this one next. Anyway, without further ado, let's just jump right into the plot. I won't do any spoilers, so if you haven't seen the movie, it's okay. But I do want you guys to have a basic understanding of what the plot's about, although that being said, it's very similar to the original, so if you've seen the original, you know what's going to happen. Once again, it opens with Barbara and her brother Johnny driving up to a cemetery. This time, I might be getting this wrong, but I believe in this movie they're going to put flowers on their mother's grave. And in the original, it was their father's grave. I wonder if this is just some sort of little inside joke by Romero to see who's paying attention. But it's their mother's grave this time. They go there, and at the cemetery, they encounter zombies, and they do the line, "They're coming to get you, Barbara." All the lines from this movie that you have to have, the classic ones, there's, they're gonna be in the movie, So, you gotta do those. Anyway, Johnny's overtaken by the zombies. Barbara gets in the car and runs away. They do a clever reinvention. Rather than just crashing the car, she doesn't have the keys, so she puts it in neutral and she crashes the car that way because she's not really driving the car, she's just coasting in neutral. And she gets to, after the crash, she runs out and she goes to a nearby farmhouse. Another change with this movie is once she's in there, there are a few zombies still walking about. Not a big herd or anything, but there is a little bit of action in this scene as well. They do a lot of the original stuff, like she still finds the animal room and looks at all the animal heads. and there still is the zombie upstairs, well, the corpse upstairs. But there's a few zombies poking about, so there's some good action in this scene running around, and you're not just safe in this house at first. But after a bit of that, Ben shows up, and of course, she meets Ben, and they start to work on securing this place. Now, Ben this time is played by Tony Todd. Tony Todd, you know most famously for being the Candyman. He is in lots of other things, Hatchet 2, Final Destination. A really good actor. Now, when I first saw that he was taking over the Ben role in this movie, I was like, okay, he's a good actor. I love to see him in things. But Tony Todd is a deep and commanding voice. He's a very strong personality. You know, you get him as the Candyman, and you see, oh man, we're doomed. We're going after the Candyman. It's this big, over-the-top personality. Now, that wasn't really the way Ben's character was in the original, so I was kind of worried that the character would be really, really different. However, when Tony Todd shows up, you can see that he's really studied Dwayne Jones's performance, and the way he's able to kind of mimic the Ben character from the original. He does it surprisingly well. He knows all Dwayne Jones's little mannerisms, and he really does a good portrayal of that character. But over time, now there are other humans in this movie, and he's going to get in altercations with them, and he's going to start yelling at them. He transitions into the Tony Todd that we all know and love, and he's such a great actor that he does this relatively smoothly. You can see him being the Dwayne Jones Ben that we know, and then swiftly, whenever there's something happening, going into the Tony Todd that we know, but where it doesn't feel jarring, and you can see he's pushed over the edge, and then he plays to where his strengths are. And Tony Todd, I mean, he's always amazing, but he's really good in this movie, and it's a great movie to see him in. Talking about the other main character now, Barbara. This time, Patricia Tallman plays Barbara. Now, in the original movie, this character undergoes a lot of stress and emotionally shuts down. Now, as I stated in my review for that movie, I think it's a feeling she's entitled to. She's undergone lots of trauma recently, and it's quite normal to shut down like that. Now, audiences, though, don't really like it when their main character doesn't get a chance to do much, and they found a creative way with this. Barbara comes in, and she still encounters that stress, and you really do see her at the beginning of this movie having to deal with that stress, but with pushes from Ben and just changes in the character in this movie, you see that she comes out on the other side of this stress, and rather than folding in on herself, she forces herself outward. And rather than just, going off into her own world, this version of Barbara, because of the stress she's been through, wants to go out and fight the walkers more aggressively. She wants to go and do something, and she can't stay pinned up. It makes her anxious, and she wants to go and fight. But at the same time, both versions come from the same root, the same cemetery incident, but this time they find a way to curve the character into a new path while still having the sort of roots of the original. And I thought it was a really clever reinvention of her character, and like I said, these movies, each one is a sample of the decade they come from, and that's a cool way to reinvent her character for the new decade. Now, as I said earlier, other characters do show up, and all these characters seem to be bigger, over-the-top personalities of the original. If you're a nicer person, you're nicer in this. Like the guy that shows up is like, oh, my uncle used to own this cabin, and I want to help everybody out, but I was so scared. And then you get the basement man. I know the character has a real name. I always just call him the basement man. He's really, really mean in this one, like in the first, but this one a little meaner. He really gets in fights with Ben. There's some swearing, which even though the original didn't have, very strong language, it was a 60s movie, they somehow worked in this more modern concept without it seeming weird. You're like, oh yeah, sure, they'll say that in this movie. So yeah, changing the tone, but where it doesn't feel different. So yeah, they get into fights, they really yell, and you get to see that human interaction that was one of the things in the first one. Like I said, Night of the Living Dead established so much of what we know about zombies that, things like a lot of it being humans versus humans were established there, and you really do get to see them fight in this one as well. And without spoiling anything, the end to the basement man's character in this one, I really did like it. I'm like, okay, that's cool. And they change it a little bit towards the end. The other thing in this movie is this house really does constantly feel like it's on the brink of being overrun. They put up boards, and it's this big race to try to put up all the boards over all the windows, and zombies are breaking in and pushing the boards down at times, and they have to go and find more wood really quick. It's got to be good enough. And in this one, you really do get the sense that at any moment the zombies can push through the windows of this house and get in. It's much more claustrophobic in that regard. But yeah, really cool. And with this one, yeah, there's a lot more action, a lot more fighting off walkers. I found that in this movie, if you want a more modern example, like the best of The Walking Dead tends to get like this, where you're walking around, walkers will pop up, or you're being surrounded by walkers and they break in. It's just really good zombie action, even when it's not head-on fighting. It's how the zombies work, Overall, really, really good in this movie. Now, of the major changes, I already talked about characters. This quite obviously has a bigger budget, and it does show with this really cool production value. There's more zombies, they're more made up, the set's more fleshed out, and you can look through it. It's more R-rated. Movies had come a while between the 60s and the 90s, and you can do a lot more. You can swear, you can do more gore. And that it actually is with the gore, it's an interesting thing. There is a good amount of gore and special effects. It's Tom Savini after all. But with Tom Savini, I really expected there to be way more gore. I mean, you think Tom Savini, you think of that death from Day of the Dead where the guy is getting ripped in half. And there is some gore in this movie. I did expect it to be a little more, though. I did expect, blood and guts all over the place, which you didn't really need to have that, but, I hear Tom Savini, I was expecting just carnage. But there is still really good special effects. One of the other big changes is there's no radio in this movie. There may be a little bit, but, the radio, the TV, that's really downplayed in this one. So you don't get the news, and you don't get to see them talking as much about the outside world. With movies the way they are, people already knew what a zombie was, so they didn't really have to sell the concept and try to make it feel real as much, because audiences were more familiar with it. You do get one scene where they do watch the news for a little bit, and you see the news anchor go, they say it might have something to do with space. Huh, can you believe it? So the big explanation in the original isn't believed near as much by the news audience in this one. And, yeah, you do get a little bit of them going, well, I don't know, it sounds like they're people eating each other, that's weird, and then they quickly turn off the TV. So that element that was so big in the original isn't played up as much here. But one thing, towards the end, you do get to see some of the outside world, and I won't spoil how this situation comes up, but you do get to see a different take on the sheriff and his men, and they're more like a gang of tailgaters that are going out there. They form their own little culture. There's some guys selling food, and they're in general having a good time. A bunch of rednecks killing zombies, and they do use the line, well, they're dead, they're all messed up. classic line. You got to get that in there. But overall, this is a really good remake. It keeps what the first one did really well. It gives it a better budget, so they can do more with it. They changed a few things people had criticisms with. But honestly, I think if they wanted to, could have changed it more. It stays really true to the spirit of the original, and it's very, very similar. And similarity, not necessarily a bad thing, especially if they do enough of their own thing, and they did. But I'm like, dang, you really nailed the original. You could have tried one or two more things, not that you had to, but they could have if they wanted to. I wouldn't have minded if they had tried, hey, let's try something here or here. But really good and really faithful. It's what more remakes should aspire to be. If you're going to do a more straight remake, I know that there's things like The Thing and The Fly, which are more remakes that go in their own direction. But if you're ever having to do a straighter remake that's more in line with what the original was, look at this movie for some good ideas. Upping the budget, changing a few things, primarily Barbara's character, a little more gore, a little more R-rated. Overall, a really good remake. Definitely the best remake of Night of the Living Dead. I've reviewed the other two on this channel already. But yeah, really good, really fun. I still definitely prefer the original, but this is a fun remake, and I'll definitely watch it again. Anyway, at the end of the video, I'll put a playlist. I've covered a lot of the Romero extended zombie franchise, a ton of movies like Night of the Living Dead 3D, Day of the Dead 2, crazy stuff like that. And if you want to see that, there'll be a playlist at the end. But anyway, to everyone who's made it this far, thank you for watching. And to everyone who's liked and subscribed, thank you. You really are helping this channel out. I'll be back again with more horror movies. I do about 95% horror on this channel. So if that sounds like something you're interested in, I definitely recommend sticking around. But anyway, Romero Zombies Extended Franchise playlist here. Have a good day, and I'll see you guys again very, very soon.